Now, we're going to turn to a story about islands. In particular, artificial man-made islands, some of which you've probably heard of. Now, the Netherlands, for example, boasts one of the largest man-made islands formed by reclaimed land. Then there's Pearl Qatar, a Riviera-style man-made island, and the so-called virtual Venice in the Middle East. And Dubai, home to several man-made islands, including the Palm Islands, as you can see here in this mega feat. It's shaped like a palm tree, and it's set to rival Izmir as the island party capital. And then we have this stretch of man-made islands in the South China Sea. There's no tourist attraction nor a luxury resort. What you are seeing is a hotspot of another kind, the site of escalating geopolitical tension. And here's why. This smattering of artificial land is called the Spratly Islands. These are contested waters. And what is increasingly alarming the international community is how China is rapidly building new artificial islands to expand its territory claim there. According to U.S. Defense Secretary Ash Carter, China has constructed more than 2,000 acres of new territory in the resource-rich Spratly Islands in the past 18 months. This build-out has angered neighboring countries such as Vietnam and the Philippines, who also claim sovereignty over all or part of these scattered islands and reefs. And that's not all. U.S. officials have announced that artillery was spotted by satellites and surveillance aircraft about a month ago on one of the new China-built islands. U.S. Navy surveillance aircraft captured an image of what is purportedly Chinese dredging vessels. Even more troubling is that the mobile artillery has since disappeared, which has many speculating that the Chinese government has removed or hidden it. Tension also escalated last Wednesday when a U.S. spy plane flew over part of the South China Sea near where China is building. The Chinese Navy issued 8 warnings to the aircraft to move away from the contested territory. 2 days later, China said it was strongly dissatisfied with that action and called on the U.S. to stop. The U.S. has become increasingly vocal about opposing any further militarization of islands in the South China Sea. And in a speech yesterday at an annual security policy forum in Singapore that included defense officials from over 30 other countries, including China, Secretary Carter called for an immediate and lasting halt to land reclamation by all countries. It is unclear how much farther China will go, he said. Joining me now is Gordon Chang, columnist for Forbes.com and author of The Coming Collapse of China, and Mira Rapp-Hooper, who is a fellow at the Center for Strategic and International Studies Asia program. Okay. Gordon, this story is one that we reported on a long time ago as a sort of, oh, this is happening, but suddenly you've called this a classic zero-sum confrontation. What exactly is at stake here?
Well, really, it's freedom of navigation from the U.S. point of view. Because if there's been any consistent American foreign policy over the course of 2 centuries, it has been defending the global commons. And China, by building these islands, is infringing on that by declaring a military alert zone over them and protesting U.S. planes in international airspace. The Chinese have territorial claims. We don't. But what we want is everyone to have access to sea and airspace.
Well, which is precisely what when she was Secretary of State Clinton said. So I think it's important. We're not claiming that we own any portion of this land, but she did say in July of 2010 that the United States has a national interest in freedom of navigation, open access to Asia's maritime commons, and respect for international law in the South China Sea. So for those of us who are not specialists in this area, help us to understand the difference between air and sea versus land.
So under international law, all rights to maritime delimitations as well as national airspace must come from land. So part of what we believe China may be doing is building islands where none really existed before so that it can claim rights to sea as well as the air above it. This is why, as Gordon mentioned, we're concerned that China's island building may interfere with freedom of navigation and freedom of overflight in the South China Sea.
Okay. So what is at stake? I mean, again, we know that most Americans aren't even very good with geography in the broadest sense. So now we're talking about little islands. They're man-made. I mean, I think we understood this sort of, if we go all the way back to the Cuban Missile Crisis and the question of the proximity of Cuba to the U.S. But what's at stake for the U.S. in the South China Sea, for goodness sake?
Well, there's $5.3 trillion of annual commerce that goes over the South China Sea. And in many ways, it's more important than the Suez and Panama canals combined. But really,
okay, I need you to pause there. more, in other words, there's more going on there as a matter of commerce than the Suez and Panama canals.
Yes. And so essentially what we have here is a problem of open seas. Now, it's not just the South China Sea, because essentially there are a lot of other countries that would like to close off international seas. And so this is really a contest for whose vision of the world is going to prevail. It's going to be the U.S., which is open and available to everybody, this open architecture, or it's going to really be China, which will close off the sea, and other countries will do the same thing. So essentially, this is a zero-sum contest. There really is very little way to compromise this.
The other awfully important piece of this is this white paper out of China saying, we will not attack unless we are attacked, but we will surely counterattack if attacked. This is obviously a translation. Are we about to go to war with China?
I don't think we're there yet, Melissa. I think certainly tensions have been heightening in the last several weeks. The real danger here is of accidental or inadvertent escalation between the claimants. What I mean by that is if China begins to flow vessels, forces, aircraft into these artificial islands, those islands are in very close proximity to other islands that are held by other claimants in the South China Sea, such as Vietnam and the Philippines. The real danger is that there could be some sort of accident where aircraft clash or ships have some kind of accident and conflict escalates from there. But both
as a matter of an accidental interaction as opposed to an active declaration.
Exactly. I think at this point, certainly both the United States and China and the other claimants involved in the South China Sea understand that a decision to go to war would be absolutely catastrophic on all sides.
So everybody hold on for me, Gordon. When we come back, I want to ask you that same question about whether or not we're about to go to war with China. And I want to do it in a way of thinking a little bit about our conflict with China. So when we come back, everybody stay with us. We're going to have more on this topic in just a moment. And also a reminder that we are following breaking news about Secretary of State John Kerry, who broke his leg in a cycling accident in France today. A lot to cover this morning. We will be right back. Sounds of jazz trumpeter Terence Blanchard have provided the sonic backdrop to nearly 30 years of American cinema. Since first lending his horn to the early works of Spike Lee, Blanchard has composed music for all of the iconic director's films since 1991 and branched out to become the most in-demand jazz musician in the film scoring world, with more than 50 soundtracks to his credit. But the five-time Grammy Award winner is also a politically engaged solo artist who hasn't shied away from making political statements through his music, whether on screen or on stage. And his work with Lee is just one example of what he considers his place in a jazz tradition, pushing for social change through art. His latest solo album, Breathless, is a direct reference to the I Can't Breathe rallying cry that followed the death of Eric Garner and other men of color at the hands of police. I'm so pleased to welcome to Nerdland composer, musician, and dramatist, one and only Terence Blanchard. We were talking earlier about the athlete and the activist.
Yes.
What is the role of the artist as the activist?
Well, I think our role is to be the social conscious, to constantly engage and to challenge people's thinking, through music. One of the things that has always happened to me throughout music is that one thing that can touch you deep in your soul, where that vulnerable spot where everybody tries to keep safe. And with what we do, we try to open up people's hearts and minds so they can, make some changes and change our community.
Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. used to talk about being creatively maladjusted to a world of racism and sexism and inequality. And I worry that without music in our public schools, without music education that teaches us that, the kids can't be creatively maladjusted. They won't know how to create something out of nothing.
Well, here's the thing that I think is really important about music. It's like in the aftermath of the Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans, as you know,
almost
I felt
10 years now.
There were a lot of kids who probably didn't have the ability to verbalize what it was that they were going through. So for me, it's when we brought the Monk Institute to New Orleans, because I thought it was very important for us to engage with those students and give them something that would allow them to express themselves in any way possible or feasible. And we saw some great results with some young kids. I remember we had a thing with some young students performing and talking about improvisation, and a 13-year-old girl just raised her hand and she said, "I think I can do that." And for me, that's huge, because for her to get up in a public forum like that and feel the need to express herself, but also find a vehicle to do it, was major.
You say the Monk Institute, referring, of course, to Thelonious Monk.
Thelonious Monk, I'm sorry.
Where
Yes.
are you in that tradition of people like Monk and Coltrane in terms of using your art to do this kind of work?
Well, you know, I've always felt like being an artist, you have to be socially conscious. You know, when I look at John Coltrane and what he did with Alabama, you know, all of the things that Miles Davis talked about, Max Roach, Freedom Now Suite, you know, it's kind of hard for me to turn a blind eye to some of these issues. So throughout my career, I've always felt like an artist, part of our job is to document our environment, our community as we're experiencing it, you know, so, and hopefully shine a different type of light on it, you know, and that's what I've been trying to do with all of my career, and that's what we're doing with this CD as well.
Well, I want to invite you at this point to perform. So
Okay.
Terrence is now going to perform his song, See Me As I Am. This is from his latest Blue Note Records release, Breathless. Terrence, you make me miss home and hearing the live music of New Orleans. Terrence Blanchard, his latest album, Breathless, is available through Blue Note Records, and that's our show for today. Thanks to you at home for watching. I'll see you next Saturday, 10